Most discussions of the Korean War focus on frontline engagements, shifting lines, and the brutal winter offensives, but there's a subtler, long-term consequence of the conflict that rarely gets attention: the failure to properly season timber for military and post-war construction. Buildings erected rapidly during the war, barracks, hospitals, bridges, were often assembled from green or inadequately dried wood. At the time, the priority was speed. Supplies had to move quickly, structures had to go up under harsh conditions, and engineers were under constant logistical pressure. What few realized then was that decades later, those same structures would warp, rot, or collapse, exacting both economic and operational costs far beyond the immediate war effort. If you're interested in uncovering these overlooked aspects of conflict and their long-term implications, subscribe to History Matters. This channel explores the decisions, oversights, and adaptations that shaped not just the battlefields, but the societies and infrastructure they touched. The Korean War demanded construction faster than nature allows wood to adapt. Timber seasoning is the process of drying wood to stabilize it, reducing moisture content to prevent shrinkage, warping, and decay. In pre-industrial and early modern construction, this step was essential. Wood left green in a building frame would twist, crack, or collapse as it dried, sometimes within months. During the Korean War, US and UN forces faced the challenge of rapidly constructing shelters, command posts, and bridges in an unfamiliar, rugged environment, with winter temperatures often dropping below -20 degrees Celsius. Supply lines were overstretched, and traditional drying processes, which could take months, were considered luxuries. The operational doctrine implicitly favored speed over material longevity. This haste had consequences both immediate and delayed. Barracks erected in early 1951 showed warping within the first season, forcing repeated repairs. Bridges constructed with green timber often required reinforcement or replacement far sooner than anticipated. Engineers understood that drying timber was ideal, but under the constraints of the conflict, it became a deferred concern. The Korean Peninsula's humid summers and harsh winters only accelerated the structural instability. Many military planners assumed that temporary structures could be replaced, but, history shows that this assumption underestimated the impact on logistics and morale. The immediate focus of military engineering was functional. Could troops be housed? Could supply lines be maintained? And could defensive positions be constructed quickly? In many cases, yes. But temporary solutions often became semi-permanent. Facilities intended for a single season or year often remained in use for multiple years post-conflict, especially in rural or contested areas. Over time, buildings sagged, floors buckled, and joints failed, revealing the hidden cost of neglecting the seasoning process. This wasn't simply a logistical inconvenience, it shaped operational behavior. Commanders had to allocate men and materials for repeated repairs, diverting resources from other critical tasks. Units operating in inadequately constructed barracks faced environmental stress, drafts, leaks, and cold that affected troop health and readiness. While not as immediately visible as frontline casualties, these structural weaknesses subtly influenced operational outcomes. The lessons of timber mismanagement were carried forward into later military engineering doctrine. Post-Korean War, military engineering manuals began emphasizing rapid but preconditioned timber use. Field manuals from the mid-1950s note that even in temporary constructions, the moisture content of wood must be considered and that untreated green timber is prone to failure. Engineers learned to improvise seasoning in situ stacking lumber for airflow in shaded, ventilated areas, or partially air-drying planks for weeks before full deployment. These practices reflect a recognition that materials science and field expediency must coexist, and that overlooking fundamental preparation can carry costs far beyond immediate operational objectives. This also influenced civilian reconstruction efforts in South Korea. Rapid urban and rural rebuilding after the armistice leaned heavily on timber, imported or harvested locally under pressure. Structures built with inadequately seasoned wood frequently required replacement within a decade, a fact often obscured in broad narratives of post-war recovery. The temporary military constructions had unintentionally set a precedent for hasty civilian projects, demonstrating how wartime compromises can echo for years in peacetime. There's a survival and engineering lesson embedded in this history. From a survivalist or preparedness perspective, the Korean War illustrates the importance of understanding material behavior under environmental stress. Green timber will always respond to moisture content changes, and honestly, ignoring this principle leads to failure. Soldiers and engineers learned that haste cannot fully compensate for natural limits. Even when under threat or constrained by logistics, the long-term consequences of ignoring material science can cascade into operational inefficiency, additional labor, and safety risks. When examining overlooked military decisions, timber seasoning demonstrates the intersection of human endurance, resource management, and environmental reality. Properly seasoned wood is not just a technical requirement, it's a force multiplier. It affects construction speed indirectly by reducing repair cycles, it impacts soldier welfare, and it has strategic consequences when supply lines and living conditions are tied to structural integrity. There are specific examples of structures that endured or failed based on this principle. Bridges along the 38th parallel, hastily assembled in late 1950 and early 1951, were repeatedly repaired due to shifting beams and cracked planks. Barracks at forward operating bases, constructed in winter from unsplit green logs, experienced sagging floors and warped walls within months. Conversely, observation posts or field hospitals that incorporated partially dried timber or locally seasoned wood performed far better, sustaining functionality through multiple winter cycles. The contrast illustrates a clear causal link between material preparation and operational sustainability. This extends into modern lessons for historians and survivalists alike. Studying these structural oversights emphasizes the importance of respecting environmental and material realities. It's tempting to assume that human ingenuity or urgency can overcome natural processes, but really, history demonstrates otherwise. Whether rebuilding infrastructure after conflict, establishing long-term encampments, or improvising shelters in a survival context, understanding the principles of material behavior, seasoning, moisture management, and structural stabilization is crucial. The Korean War provides a concrete historical case study, where neglecting these principles created repeated and avoidable costs. The broadest geopolitical lesson is that minor logistical or technical oversights can accumulate into strategic consequences. In the Korean context, the focus on speed and mobility was necessary, but the deferred attention to materials led to resource diversion that might have otherwise strengthened operational efficiency elsewhere. These consequences remind us that logistics, engineering, and supply chain decisions are inseparable from military outcomes, even when they are less visible than battlefield statistics or troop movements. Remembering these details gives depth to our understanding of war. The Korean War is often remembered for its cold weather, shifting front lines, and geopolitical significance, but the small decisions, how to prepare wood, how to build a bridge, how to house troops, reveal the human and material realities that underpin historical outcomes. They offer lessons not only for historians, but for anyone interested in applied survival skills, engineering foresight, or the unintended long-term effects of wartime expediency. If understanding these overlooked practical and human aspects of history adds value to your perspective, subscribe to History Matters, Sharing these episodes helps highlight the subtleties that often escape popular narratives, ensuring that the consequences of decisions, whether on the battlefield or in reconstruction, are not forgotten.